right, guys. Hey, it's Jonathan Edwards here. Welcome to another video or an audio, depending on where you are. But listen, as a disclaimer, as always, I work with aspiring athletes and their families. These are families who've got big athletic dreams and they're really go for it. My advice is geared towards them. So with that in mind, some of that advice may not rub you the right way if you are not as kind of into it or committed. If you aren't willing to take 100% responsibility for your athletic experience, if you're going to blame coaches, blame the weather, blame something other than yourself, this probably isn't the advice for you. So if you're going to hang out, that's fine. Leave appropriate comments where necessary. But again, just a little disclaimer, this advice isn't for everybody. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let's get started. Direct message me sometimes. And that's sometimes weird for me to get back to, just so you know. So, but I thought I would talk about, okay, so the first topic tonight, if I got my banners right, okay, and we'll get started here. It's when should your athlete start thinking about playing their sport in college? So, I work with a lot of goalies in a couple of different sports. Lacrosse is one, ice hockey is another, soccer, whatnot. But I work with athletes at Athlete Specific and at mentalperformanceschool.com. I work on, we have a program there, which is the only program of its kind that deals on kind of mental performance and sports performance for both athletes and parents. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And I love that. And so one of the things that this topic comes up a lot, right? Where we talk about like, well, you know, when should we get serious about this? Like when should my athletes be thinking about, you know, playing their sport in college? When should they think about becoming like a recruitable, you know, athlete? And so this goes in a couple phases, and I want to talk about those phases tonight. And I'm also going to give you some really controversial takes on this because I am kind of known. I tend to rub people the wrong way. You know, I talk to people a lot, and I say like, listen, your athlete needs to start thinking like now. You know, and well, my kid's 3. I don't care. My kid's in the womb. I don't really care. You need to start thinking about this stuff, or else because what happens is you will be disappointed more than you will regret having taken it seriously early enough. Okay, so here's what happens: is that when you look at the general population, okay, and this gets a little out there, but if you just follow me for a second. The general population leads quite an average life. And when you start doing research on what is average, okay, you start coming up with some pretty crazy statistics. Like the average person in the United States is like overweight. You know, the average person in like the middle class is basically broke. And depending on where you get your information from, you're going to find some pretty cool statistics there. So I'm not going to get into all that now, but I share that as a way that when your athlete says, hey, I want to play in college, okay, that's an out of the ordinary decision, right? And a lot of people are going to meet that with resistance, okay? And they're going to meet that with skepticism, and they're going to look at you and they're going to want to like, well, how do you think what does your kid think that they're going to be able to make it? And my kid over here has been playing for 12 years, whatever. Like, so you'll immediately run into everybody's resistance. But the thing is that in almost like a subconscious fashion, and a way a lot of parents will do this, a lot of grandparents will do this, especially, is if you say, let's say your athlete is small and young. And for those of you guys that have high school athletes now, you'll remember this, right? When there was a point when your athlete was young and they decided they're like, I want to play Division I lacrosse, or I want to play professional hockey, or I want to play basketball like Steph Curry. You know, and what does everybody do? Like, oh yeah, that's nice, kiddo. They pat him on the head, and they'll say things like, "Well, don't get your hopes up. We don't want you to get your hopes up." And why do they say that? Well, the reason why they say that is because they fundamentally really don't like seeing their kid disappointed. Now, what I find really interesting is that there's parents out there who are like, no, I'm good with my kid being disappointed. And a lot of my athletic parents are okay like that. A lot of my parents who have athletes and they're also entrepreneurial, like they own their own business, are very much about like, hey, I want my kid to get disappointed like right away. Well, when push comes to shove, okay, and your athlete has opportunities to be disappointed, that's an interesting time to think like, well, did my athlete actually absorb all that disappointment and then like get rid of it? That's the key. Okay, that's the real key here. So when we talk about this discussion about like, when should your athletes start thinking about playing in college or pro or whatnot? My answer to that is, how soon can you start? Right? Can you start yesterday? Can you start right now? Because what happens is that I'll get an email, and usually, parents who have their athletes, or the parents who join mental performance school, they're always like, oh my God, my daughter's a junior and she's not getting the looks that we thought she was going to get. What do we do? And I'm like, well, if we could rewind you, we probably could have nipped this in the bud a lot earlier. And so when is early? How early do you want it, right? Stephen Covey, one of the best business books of all time, is a book called The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And so some of you might remember the Franklin Covey Corporation that back in the 90s just blew up on the back side of this book. And one of the things that happened is that the beginning of that book, the first principle is begin with the end in mind. But when you think about most youth sports, is everybody is taught to, hey, we're just here for fun, right? It's all about the fun for the kids. Um, True to a point, until people get disappointed that they're not reaching their goals. And when families start investing money, and you're going to invest money anyway, right? That's the way I always look at this. And when people, join our programs, one of the things I say about our programs is that the money you spend with us makes everything else you spend more valuable, right? It's like if you bought lumber to build a house and you forgot to buy nails, right? It's like, well, how soon do you want to buy the nails? Well, the sooner you buy the nails, the sooner you start building the house, right? Otherwise, you're just like kind of accumulating lumber here and there and maybe some windows. And before you know it, when it's time to actually build a house, you're still not ready. So I always kind of encourage my parents to say, listen, the general population is going to say, hey, ease up. Don't take it too seriously, right? Don't pressurize your kid. Or one of my favorites is like, oh, that parent's living vicariously through their child. I've never seen that to be the case. What I see though, and I see this a lot, is parents who love their kids, right? Parents who love their kids, and they're going to do the best that they can for them, given the resources that they have. Right. And so I've shared this story before. Like, I've worked with athletes who are the sons and daughters of billionaire parents. And I've also worked with the sons and daughters of parents who have nowhere near those means. Okay. And what I'll tell you is that the athletes within all those situations, they all fail equally. They make it equally and they fail equally, right? Just because we all can look up stories of kids that have it worse off than your athlete does, who've made it. And we've also can find athletes who have more resources who have failed, right? And so that's important to understand, because some athletes think like, oh, if I had more, and a lot of parents think that like, oh, well, if I had that, I would, my kid would be an All-American by now. Well, it's not true. To me, it's a fundamental understanding of how this athlete's going to progress. So the idea is that everybody around you is going to say, don't worry about it. Sophomore, junior year of high school, then you can start getting serious. I believe this: the sooner your athlete gets serious, the sooner everything has an anchor, right? So, I use the vegetable analogy, right? If you're, as a parent, we all know this, like, you want your kids to eat some vegetables, right? And it's like it's a pain in the butt and they don't like it and they throw it on the floor to the dog or whatever. But then finally, when your athlete decides that they actually have a reason for eating those vegetables, right? Like, let's say they want to be an All-American someday. And then you go, well, you got to eat your broccoli because your body needs nutrients. And then what does your athlete do? They go, okay. And then they have one and they're like, all right, I'm not fully loving this, but I'll have it anyway. Right. And then what do? They start to eat it, right? Because why? They have an anchor. So now you take the sports side of things and say like, okay, listen, you've told me you want to play Division I ice hockey, but your grades are bad. All right, we're going to pull the plug right now on some stuff until you get those grades up. Why do we do that? Now, there's some parenting experts that would tell you not to do that. And so that's not always my first go-to. But that's something that I would recommend if you've done that with your athlete, you dig into it a little bit and go like, is this the right way to handle it with our athlete? Because sometimes, sport is the only thing your athlete really grasps onto, right? And so taking that away as a motivation to go after something they're not really enjoying, it can sometimes backfire. So just, I won't get too deep in that now, but just give that some thought. The idea here though is, okay, when should your athletes start thinking about taking this all seriously and playing in college, or whatever their sport is, softball, baseball, archery, equestrian? Now. How about now? All right, go for it. Right, because if your athlete has a science project and they hate science, we'll have them wrap in the sport that they love into that class, right? Because why? That's the anchor, right? Now that makes physics more important. I had a baseball player years ago who did their entire senior paper on curveballs, right? And on the velocity changes and the curves and the seams and all this. It was crazy. It was awesome, right? But that's something that you can do, and your athlete will do it better. So not only does getting serious about sport help your athlete, but it also can trickle into other areas of their life where they start to reel things in because they go, oh, yeah, this all helps me, right? This all leads me to being a better athlete, right? So if that resonates with you, do me a favor, hit the like button, leave me a comment. That'd be great. And yeah, I thought that's the kind of the first topic for tonight. How soon, especially as we're going into the summer, as I'm recording this, we're going into the summer, and a lot of people have chances to go play. There's events, and we're going to cover that in the next section here. But the idea is that you want to, the sooner you get serious, the flip side, I'll finish on this. The flip side of getting serious is that people worry about burnout, and I don't believe we can have burnout. Like, I don't believe athletes burn out. Like, so that's one of my controversial takes is, like, I don't believe in burnout. I do believe in under recovered, right? I do believe in like taking a break and letting the body rest and letting the mind rest. That's recovery. That's not like I'm done. And what ends up happening a lot of times when athletes want to quit their sport and they say that, oh, people say like, oh, they burned out. Well, no, maybe that athlete realizes that they weren't going to get their dream. Maybe other things came up in their life that became more important to them, right? And that's fine. A lot of people look at, they say like 70% of athletes or 60% of athletes leave sport by the time they're 13. Well, who's to say that of those athletes that quit the sport that they were going to stay in it, right? Even if the environment around them was the most supportive thing ever, athletes get girlfriends and boyfriends, and they get into drugs, they start to party. They start to realize like, well, okay, maybe I'm not going to be an athlete, but maybe I want to get serious about something else in my life. And that has nothing to do with the sport or the coaches that they were part of, but it has everything to do with the fact that that life changes, and that's okay. All right. So don't fear burnout. Don't fear that getting serious is going to hurt you, because if your athlete turned around to you and said, listen, I want to get super serious about math, right? I want to go to MIT and be a math major. What would you do? Well, you'd probably go, all right, like, let's get you a tutor, right? Let's get you a better calculator. Like, let's get you a protractor, right? Whatever it needs, right? Like, I'm just joking there a little bit. But the thing is that why would we, what the world will tell you is that they'll say like, oh, only 2% of athletes ever play their sport in college. All right, let's plan to be one of those 2%, right? Let's just not buy in everybody else is thinking that the odds are we're going to fail. Well, you're going to fail if you don't really just kind of go for it, right? So plan to be the 2%. And I can guarantee you this, your athlete along the way will learn more about themselves and more about life by trying to be in that 2% than by just kind of going like, yeah, well, whatever, right? When you fail, you want to fail clean, right? You want to fail hard and clean and go like, all right, this is not, I gave it my best. It's not going to work out. And I'm cool with that. And now I'm moving on. The worst thing, and we all know this, all the athletes who are listening to me now, that we all know those athletes that are bitter, right? That because they, for whatever reason, they weren't able to give enough, and they never got it out of their system, man. And then they just like, nah, they just fester, right? And they always look back and wonder, what if? Don't wonder what if. Go for it. All right.